Welcome, everyone, to the C-Suite Sales and Marketing Perspectives podcast. I'm Steve McDonald, your host. Today, we have a super interesting conversation with Sabina Jasinska. Now, Sabina, you are the current CMO at Team Internet, but what we're going to talk about today is part of what you've been going through for years and years and years, and you've got a point of view on point of views, that we should have one. And it shouldn't be the same as everyone else, right? Whether it's the campaigns we bring to the market or the point of view of our company overall in the marketplace, that we have to have something that I'm going to quote from Forbes magazine, which is a point of view should have a little bit of a healthy dose of controversy in it, right? We can't make everyone think we think the same way. Right? We're trying to carve out a point of view that makes us different, right? That makes people think, that raises eyebrows. And being a little bit controversial in the appropriate way isn't a bad way to go. So with that, what I want to do, though, is beyond just your CMO role, I'd love to know a little bit more about your background. If you wouldn't mind just spending a minute here and telling us a little bit more about you, and then we'll dive right in.
Thank you so much, Steve, for inviting me today. I work for Team Internet, which is a leader in internet solutions. It's a big multinational group specialized in search. We take audiences from Google and social media, matching those hard-to-reach audiences for our clients. We have a comparison pages. So every time you look for a vacuum cleaner, you wind up on a page like ours. And we also manage 50% of URL in the world. So we are number two in the domain names business. But my background is I started as an attorney, specialized in labor law litigation. That's why I always love the area where law and marketing meet. I also have a background in localization. So 13 years working for top language service providers and also working on big campaigns and initiatives of accessibility and making content accessible for people with different disabilities, and many years in different technologies, working both as a CMO as well as Chief Growth Officer. So quite a lot of experience in different areas, which I think is perfect when you are a CMO. You have to really understand what's going on in the market and not only be focused on one industry.
I will have to say I have not met too many CMOs that started out as an attorney.
Yeah. I think it's easier for a CMO after being an attorney than to do it the other way around.
Probably right on that one. Well, I'm going to expect a lot now out of our conversation based on that kind of a background. But I just want to ask you up front, I gave kind of a definition of the Forbes, point of view on a point of view, right? When you think about a point of view in the company that you're representing and how you're marketing your entire go-to-market strategy, you were a chief growth officer too. That encompasses far more than just marketing, right? How do you think about the point of view of a company and what it does?
So from the company perspective, I think that should be quite clear. And if it's not, then you should really work on it as a CMO. So it's really understanding who your customer is, who your market is, what are your competitors, what are your USPs. So going through the classic steps of the serious decisions or Forrester research program, the product marketing management model, when you have to tick all those boxes in order to really own the market and understand how you can be different than your competition. But also, I think that's the view that has to be constantly challenged and constantly verified, because at the end, if you are B2B or B2C, it is really the customer that takes over the buying journey. So only the companies that offer that well-rounded and seamless experience are going to stand out in the market. And those expectations are changing all the time. Just we still remember when we felt so lucky finding a taxi on a rainy day in New York. And now we want that taxi to smell nice. We want to have a nice conversation. We want to arrive it within minutes. And we want that for a much lower price, right? So our expectations are constantly changing. How can we understand that? I think that's one of the biggest challenges we have.
It's really interesting because I love how you talk about changing expectations, because one of the things that that we need as a point of view, it has to have a North Star. It has to have somewhere where it's grounded, where we know we're heading. That heading is in the direction of our customers, right? The customer is the highest voice of authority in the business. But as you just defined it, that target is always changing. I mean, there's two things that I think are always true about the ICP. They're complex They're always changing, right? So, in that kind of a world, how do you keep on top of that kind of changing that North Star, this constantly evolving and, in the market dynamics and changes, it's always in flux, right? How do you keep up with that? If that's our goal, right?
Absolutely. Luckily, we have AI and lots of incredible tools that help us scan content across social media to see and to identify those trends and behaviors, maybe new topics that people are talking about. And this is an incredibly valuable tool in a hand of a marketing team. I used to work as a chief marketing officer for a disruptive AI that was one of the first who patented that way of scanning all the content on TikTok and Instagram, Reddit, like you name it, YouTube, and really understanding what are those trends. So we help, for example, big companies in luxury, alcohol, and any other space in finding those interesting points to talk with customers. And we identified, for example, for NYX, which is a cosmetic brand, we identified groups of hip hoppers who would be interested in using this makeup. So not an obvious audience that you would think of. And we've done it over and over again with multiple brands.
If the customer is kind of the North Star and they're always changing, then how do we keep on top of that? How do we understand the fluctuations if our ICP is always complex and always changing, right? How do we stay on top of that?
So before we started to work with different AI tools, we'll have to go through a painful exercise of voice of the customer, capturing feedback across different channels, and really understanding what customers would say in a variety of surveys or NPS scans that we will do over the year. But it is a very painful process, important for any company to go through, where you can identify by combining different answers from the clients, you can understand if they said this, what it really means if they also responded that to that question. I also really love working with this type of survey. But now marketers have a much more powerful tool at their hand, and this is AI, which helps us identify different trends and behaviors or preferences across all the content that is available. I used to work for a company called Kodak, which was a disruptive technology, one of the first that patented that way of capturing all the data across social media channels such as TikTok, Facebook, Reddit, YouTube, Snapchat, and really understanding what people were talking about in those different markets. And we help big brands, often failing brands, who were really struggling with finding this next audience in really finding that gold. And I'll give you a great example. So one of our main companies was Lululemon, famous yoga brand that basically already owns the whole yoga market. And it was really difficult for them to sell those yoga pants and apparel to new audiences. So what we were able to find, thanks to our technology, is that there was an area which linked different groups and different communities by one interest, the practice of breath. And we found out that there are many other groups and different athletes who are also interested in that practice of breath. And one of those were hip hoppers and rappers. And thanks to that technology, we're able to target those, for example, at different hip hop gigs, at different concerts, and it increased that popularity of Lululemon. The campaign brought 300 million more of revenue, and the spur price for Lululemon increased 20%. And this was all thanks to that very unique insight. Another great example that I had the pleasure last week to participate in the Marketing Society breakfast in London, where BBH, the famous agency that coined the tagline where the word zigzag, will help Burger King with a campaign in London, offering also a different angle of how Burger King can increase that visibility where everybody already knows the name, and there are just so many different options for to have a burger. So what they've done, and this was also based on an insight, they found out that 30% of women after giving birth have this animal hunger and they really want to eat something quite substantial on the dream of the burger. So the campaign that they created was based on the bundles of joy and delivered at showing a Burger King delivered to the mother at the hospital bed. We have controversy and other discussions on social media and in press about what is appropriate, why this woman is half naked on the bed. Is it really good taste to show it? But you can imagine it was a very successful campaign that brought 100% of the audience was actually reached through those different elements and assets. And yeah, received quite a few awards. So a great success thanks to an insight.
When you were telling these stories, what I kept thinking is that you're tying into emotions, right? And it's not always about the rational decision making. Even in the B2B world, right? Everything you talked about there applies directly over to a B2B marketing environment as well. And so I just wanted to ask is in terms of understanding this ICP, what is your balance? How do you think about kind of the rational and the emotional in how you create those kinds of campaigns, right? And the insights that then leads to those kind of campaigns.
I think even the emotional needs to have some rational in it because you need that rational to convince your legal team or your corporate team to even launch the campaign that is a bit of controversial. And I would say you have to base it on the real insights to avoid situations like Pepsi with the Black Lives Matter protests or AT&T with the famous ad with the World Trade Center, or many of those very risky campaigns, which ended up with quite a lot of public backlash. So you always need to, when playing with emotions, you always need to base it on a true insight, and then it really works. But I think what you talk about emotions, you also need to provide some fun to our audiences because it doesn't matter if it's a B2B, B2C, if it's internal and external. At the end, and this is my life motto, at the end, everyone wants to have fun. And if you can provide a little bit of that fun, even if the very boring B2B space or during the RFP process, then you won't. That's how you stand out. That's why I think the best time for marketers was COVID, when all the campaigns always had a lot of humor in them because how to take ourselves seriously when we are all sitting more from us. And I think this was just the best example of this of the marketing that was really very, very timely. So I can go on and on with my favorite example. Incredible. Well, everyone from IKEA to you name it, everyone switched to a more fun company except for Sky, who are still promoting their live games when the entire government and companies were already switching people to work from home. Sky didn't undo the button and was still promoting their live matches.
Here's what I'd love to do. I would love to take your thoughts on creating a point of view, and we've heard about it at the campaign level. But you were talking to me earlier, and you had some really great thoughts and a point of view on just like the role of the CMO as a C-suite executive inside of the company, and how do they earn the right at the table? And like you had some really interesting point of views on that, and I just wanted to give you a chance to talk a little bit about that subject too.
Thank you. I think at the end, the most important thing is to bring value. And in order to understand what is the value that you need to bring and what is that need that your company at this specific moment has, you have to really understand everything from who are our clients, what we promote, what are our USPs, but also what are our financial targets. So you cannot be a CMO if you don't understand those bits, everything from financial, how we make money, to who really our clients are, and why they would choose us over a competitor. So I believe in order to get that seat at the table, you have to be first of all, very, very well prepared and understand your product inside out. Spend every minute on understanding where you are, what your teams do. Speak with everyone in the company. Speak with someone who places programmatic campaigns just to understand what messages they are using, because this is the best lesson. You have to know more than everyone else in the company. Second, you really need to convince everyone to follow frameworks. And there's some of the famous ones that I really always promote whatever I can. Serious decisions, first year research has a fantastic step by step programs. What marketing team needs to do, what product, what sales, and what operations teams do. Basically, you show everyone this is what we are going to deliver. We're going to do this research. We're going to provide you with those programs. Here is the calendar. This is how you help everyone understand your role in the process, and also help them wait for all the deliveries that you are going to do for the company for that specific program. So it is important to really structure yourself and not to and I would say constantly, especially if you are a woman, constantly fight with this impression that we are only there just to organize events and make beautiful brochures, but we don't really have any strategic input into the company's operations and future.
That right there, right? The idea, if you're a CMO, you have a functional role in charge of marketing and everything we've talking about. But as a C-suite executive, you have another extraordinarily important role, which is an executive planning for long-term sustainable growth of the business, right? That is 100% about strategy, right? That's not about execution. Ultimately, it's going to turn into the go-to-market plan. But when we take on our C-suite roles, we take on another level of responsibility. And so you had a really interesting point of view on the voice of the customer and in earning that seat at the table and being able to talk strategy. And I just wanted you to be able to talk a little bit more about that.
Yes, marketing without strategy is just an execution. And it is important, especially in various sales organizations, it is important to separate that role from sales. And how to do that? It is by, again, but going one by one in those steps that need to be done in the strategy phase. So someone needs to do the work, and that's why this is marketing role. Someone needs to do the role and work understanding the market, understanding the customer, the buyer personas, the buying centers, and only after doing that work, only moving into messaging, only then moving to naming, to the brand questions, and only when that is done, that's where you can move to the execution phase, and that's where you start working on your campaigns. That's when you start delivering all those different tactics. And it's only when that is done, then you can work on growth and work on those win and loss analysis and voice verbal compliments later. So you have to do that first step. You have to start working on strategy, and that should be that is so is the marketing role. And what you also mentioned is that we need to prepare the company for the next few years. How to do it in an ever-changing market and market conditions. There's another area where marketing also should plays a very important role. It is industry research. So in my team, we also have people who are specialized in specific industries, and they constantly either listen to podcasts, go to different events, read the newspapers, read the white papers, and they constantly get informed of what is new in the industry to identify how we can adapt um, our services to those changing conditions. It is also an important part where marketing always need to look for.
So it's interesting because, a C-suite executive from sales is usually like the chief revenue officer, right? And they own sales and revenue. But to the degree that they own the whole revenue motion, it depends on the different company, but they always own sales, right? Customer success owns customer success. Marketing owns marketing. Who owns the relationship with the customer? Who owns the voice of the customer?
I think that's separate. So voice of the customer is under marketing. It's in the growth stage. There are like lots of different elements of that. So there's five main areas. There's customer feedback. There's user groups. But the relationship with the customer, that's done at the sales and customer service level. This is the day-to-day relationship with the customer. So I think that is separate. But one of the elements what is needed for marketing to make those informed decisions is field feedback. And there are also programs that allow you to structure that feedback loop at every level of the organization. And very important project that many companies were going through, but we constantly need to go through, is a customer centric type of product where you realize what is everybody doing at the line facing the customer. And that could be anybody from production, sales, understanding that at all the different levels, coming back to that strategy level, redesigning customer experience over time and constantly. And those customer centric programs, this is owned by marketing.
It's interesting because you played the role of chief growth officer and the role of CMO. What do you think is the difference between the two? What would you articulate as like the biggest difference between the two?
I think for me, being a CMO that moved into a chief growth officer role, one of my major feelings was frustration because I knew that I would better spend some part of my budget on ABM, on speaking with customers, on meeting them at conferences, than on designing this next beautiful website or the beautiful campaigns. So all my focus, because I was responsible for the number, was shifted from marketing to really sales. And of course, it's a fantastic in the role of the growth um, of chief growth officer, chief revenue officer. What's fantastic is that you can own that relationship and you can plug in sales or marketing at the time that you need it or the SDR team. But at the end, your focus completely changes. And I also agree with the saying that if you have limited budgets for marketing, don't spend it on any brand awareness campaigns because that is too costly for too little benefit. In this case, you have to redirect that to for all the different sales tactics and activations for redirects to meetings, to events, all the face-to-face interaction with the customer instead of brand awareness. Well, I think at the end between the two rows, if your heart is with marketing, it's a bit of frustration.
So one of the things you mentioned there is putting more resources into face to face, right? Real time with people. And that kind of gets to be a lost art these days, right? There's like you mentioned programmatic campaigns, we're now on Teams calls. We're like even just having a conversation with a buyer these days, they're waiting longer and longer and longer, right? In this ABM world to even want to talk to us.
Mhm.
So everybody wants more FaceTime. I mean, ABM is a relationship process, right? Like B2B marketing is relationship based. And so the ultimate expression of that is person to person, right? Face to face. How do you do that these days, right? Where the trends are going against us. They don't want to talk to us to the very end. Like getting up, having physical meetings, scheduling calls or phone calls or even Teams calls or like this. How do we get more FaceTime when the trends are going against us?
Luckily, we have events. And we all remember during COVID how we all longed to go to a conference, and this is all happening now. Especially in the quarters, like the first quarter of the year, the third quarter of the year, there's a conference after a conference after the conference, which actually gives you an opportunity to meet all the decision makers in one place. So each of the industries have their big tentpole conferences. I just came back from Dubai, a C-Lead conference with 7,500 people. Everyone was there. So makes more sense to send your entire team from around the world to this one conference in Dubai because in 1 or 2 days they're going to meet all their partners, all their suppliers, and all their customers in this one place and this one conference. So I think there's an incredible value still in this sort of face-to-face interaction. Um, and in addition to that, working with our events team, we always need to also understand what is that next big conference, where all those decision makers are going to go this year. And we see that year after year, that changes. And year after year, there are all those different pop-up events when you realize only really a week later on LinkedIn, they met last week in the Hamptons, how to get the invitations for the next year. Almost you have to add it into your budget, because otherwise, unless depending what of course what the cost of customer acquisition is for your specific product or service, but it is still a very important area of what we do in marketing and sales and as a company in general.
There's so many more questions that I have, but there's one last question that I want to ask because we've covered a lot on the podcast so far. We talked about a lot. If there was one thing that you wanted people to take away from this episode, what would that
Mhm.
be?
I think it is a lot of energy and a lot of focus to follow things that are important for your industry, and really be present and be aware of what is happening. Look at both those campaigns that are have the sparkle and they're different, like the one with the Burger King, but also look into how customers' expectations are changing and where they are going to spend their money. We see mm, we see the big move to pay per hour, pay per day, pay per service. Nobody wants to do subscriptions, yearly to yearly subscriptions anymore. How you are going to find out? Only by being aware, by using different technologies yourself, by going to different events, by using everything from Netflix to whatever you have on your phone, and by really understanding how those new things apply for your business.
Well, I love it. Here's the thing I know is going to happen. People are going to have more questions. Is it okay if I give out a link to your LinkedIn profile and when people have questions, they can reach out to you?
With pleasure, with pleasure. I also would love to hear what those questions are and how we can maybe work on something new together. Thank you.
Well, fantastic. And what's important about this is, you've held multiple C-suite roles in multiple different companies, and to share your perspectives on what's important and what we need to be focusing on to create that long-term sustainable growth. We all do this as C-suite executives in our peer community. Then we share with each other. It's like the rising tide that lifts all boats. And I just wanted to say thank you for being that part of the tide today.
Thank you very much, Steve, for having me.